So let's see if we can get a clearing here and get the car to move around a little bit. So it's cold, and as you can see, tires are loose. A little bit of rubbing from the 17x9s. They don't quite fit in the rear, and we're hopping over these bumps. Short travel out of the teen suspension in this car. Heavy on the brakes. These are the stock brake pads, and they actually work quite well for a street car. Woohoo! But see, this is where the AP2 is more stable than the AP1 is. When you're cruising over bumps like that, it doesn't get nearly as upset as the AP1, so you could be a little bit more aggressive on the throttle, putting your foot down and opening it up quicker at corner exit. Both cars are freaking fantastic. I've always loved the S2000. It's wonderful.
What is up, guys? The time has come to put Project AP2 S2000 out on the road for a proper driving impression. For those of you just tuning in, this is a lightly tuned 2005 S2000. It has a Greddy Spectrum Elite 70mm exhaust and Burke Technologies High Flow Cat, a square set of 17x9 plus 40mm offset Rays 57 Extreme wheels with 225 front and 245 rear BF Goodrich Rival tires. Lastly, for suspension, a set of Teen Street Flex coilovers. The car currently weighs in at 2,878 pounds in this trim. So let's get behind the wheel and take this girl for a ride, shall we?
All right, fellas. So out here in this 2005 AP2 S2000, for those of you who don't know, I've been a real big fan of the S2000 for quite a while. This is almost kind of my semi-first dream car, if you will. Before the FDRX7, I kind of wanted one of these also, just coming from a heavy Miata background. I've had my 2003 AP1 for quite some time. This car is a little bit newer to me. I picked it up about a year ago from a good friend of mine. So it's pretty interesting to see the revisions and the updates going from my 03 AP1 to this 05 AP2. Cool thing about the 05 is it's the last year of the cable throttle linkages before they went to drive-by-wire and added traction control. So you have all the updates that came along with the AP2, but you don't have the additional fluff or nannies, which I think that's pretty neat. So from a driving standpoint, it still feels very similar to the AP1. The steering rack is a little bit slower in the AP2. It's not bad though. I honestly where the AP1's a little bit more hyper prototype, the AP2 is just a pinch more relaxed. But unless you drive them back to back, the difference isn't that obvious immediately. Everything on the interior is mostly the same. I do like the updated center console and the shifter surround here. I think visually it's a little bit better. Not a fan of the brushed silver accents that they added, but I do like how the interior it has more black accents, like the gauge cluster bezel and surround, where my AP1s is kind of like this gunmetal gray color. It just looks a little bit weird. So the AP2 looks a little bit nicer in that regard too. The gauge cluster, they shrunk the RPM band a little bit. I kind of like the AP1s, how it spans the whole length of the cluster from left to right. But other than that, visually, from an interior perspective, they're about the same. They both have about the same noise levels. And talking about how they drive, the things that are noticeable on the AP2 is there was rear suspension geometry changes on the AP2, and they did this to kind of calm the rear end down a little bit and make the car rotate a little bit more progressively. It's not a terribly huge difference. They did change the rear subframe and the upper rear control arms to achieve this. It's something that's easily updatable on the AP1s. When this car is at the limit in an oversteer situation, the rear end does rotate a little bit more progressively, where the AP1 you can feel is a little bit more lively and more eager to kind of bounce around. It's not a huge difference. Both cars you still have to treat with respect, because the S2000 is a car that will snap and bite you if you kind of handle it like a knucklehead. The weight of this car is definitely noticeable versus my AP1 when I had these both on the scales. Now, keep in mind, this car really hasn't had anything for weight reduction done. Even the exhaust that's on here, the Greddy Spectrum Elite, is still a full dual exhaust, so that there's probably only like a 10-pound weight savings over stock, if any at all. But this car weighed in at 2870 on my scales. It still retains the full factory soft top assembly, but has the added hard top. Granted, the double carbon Mugen style hardtop isn't very heavy. It's actually quite light for a hardtop of its size, but other than that, there's really been no weight reduction. So I think the AP2 is a little bit heavier anyways with the things that they beefed up in it. You do feel that weight, especially when you start to transition and drive the car a little bit more aggressively. My AP1 weighed in around 2690-ish. And that's just with some motor modifications. We're already getting interrupted here. Yeah, so my AP1 weighed what is it, 100, about 150 pounds less on the scales, and just that weight difference, because I've driven my AP1 for quite a while. It was my daily for a long time. So hopping out of that and then getting into this, you do notice the difference in the weight a little bit. Too bad this guy got in front of me here. I really love this turn. What else? The engine, 2.2 liters. It is stroked. I don't remember how much they stroked it by. I want to say it was 4 millimeters or 6 millimeter longer crank stroke versus the AP1. So as a result, they lowered the RPM, the 8,000 max RPM, to make it a little bit safer and easier on the engine. I think it's kind of funny because hopping out of the AP1 and into the AP2, the AP1 feels deceivingly faster, probably because it's a little bit more crazy, hairy of a ride, and like the engine screaming up to 9,000 RPM makes it a little bit more exhilarating and exciting, where you do kind of lose that bit of excitement with that last the last 1,000 RPM in this, because it's not there. But when you line them up, this kind of jumps ahead about a half a car length over the AP1, and it stays there going forward. They also shortened gears 1 through 4 in the AP2 to make it accelerate a little bit better and kind of just make a little bit better advantage of the power. Honda rates these motors the same, but I think the AP2, you could really say it's about 250, 260 crank horsepower. Dynos back to back, these consistently dyno 10 to 15 wheel horsepower more than the AP1. So that plus the way it accelerates, even given the added weight and the added everything beefed up, it is definitely a more powerful engine, and also tuned ones in NA format seem to make overall a little bit more power and respond a little bit better to the bolt-ons versus AP1, because the AP1 is just a little bit more maxed out. Throwing the extra displacement at it, the head still flows exactly the same, although the camshafts are less aggressive in the AP2, which you feel. Honda probably just did this because they said, why have more aggressive cam lobes when we're not going to that 9,000 RPM where you can really make full use of those. Now granted, you take a set of aftermarket cams, put them in the AP2, raise the rev limit up to 8,600, which is where piston speeds become the same as the AP1, and you can make advantage of that extra duration. This car will definitely see some good horsepower gains up there. All right, so first gear. The car gets up and goes pretty good. I definitely think that this is not a car where you could say it's terribly fast, especially looking at it from the standpoint of a driver's car. When you're pushing this and you're winding out through some back roads or you're on the track, like it's not horribly slow. It's still a bit of a momentum car, but it's enough power to move the thing along. One thing that's definitely noticeable, and it's a little bit of a nuance for me, is that in the AP2, the flywheel is 20 pounds, so it's up 6 pounds over the AP1s, which is 14. And Honda incorporated a clutch delay valve into the clutch slave cylinder, which it allows the fluid to pass through when you depress the clutch pedal to actuate the clutch slave. But when you release the clutch pedal and the fluid has to travel back, it restricts the flow, causing the clutch to actually slip a little bit. So the heavier mass of the flywheel, combine that with that clutch delay, which is kind of slipping the clutch for you every time you release the clutch, you feel that when you're shifting and RPMs don't drop as quickly, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to launch this car. It's a bit of a nuance. You can easily bypass that stuff by switching to an AP1 clutch slave and going with a lighter weight flywheel. But it's just one of those things that I think one of the things I always loved about the S2000 was just the immediate response of everything, and I like the way the RPMs raise and lower on the AP1 much better. And on my AP1, I eventually went to a 7-pound flywheel, which was a huge difference over the stock to like make it the revs even more snappier and quick to blip the gas and everything else. I think that's just a part of the experience. So if you were shopping S2000s and you found a really clean, low mileage AP1, there's nothing wrong with it as long as it was maintained well. If anything, it's probably a little bit more exciting to drive stock for stock. But from a base tuning platform, given all the revisions and the extra displacement of the 2.2 and the AP2, it's probably will nudge it ahead ultimately, like equal mods tuned versus tuned. The AP2 will probably shine just a little bit more just because it has all those extra comforts in them, or not comforts, extra revisions in them. One thing I want to make mention of is one of the revisions that was changed for the AP2 is that, first of all, the Honda S2000 gearbox for me is the benchmark of gearboxes. I think it is the best gearbox I've ever felt, and I've shifted quite a few. The throws are very short, they're very direct and engaging, and they're intended, so you get positive feedback with every throw. It just feels freaking proper. Metal on, well, actually I shouldn't even say it's metal on metal because it actually uses like a rod that goes into the transmission, but it's close enough to say that it's metal on metal. In the AP2 transmission, one of the revisions was that Honda switched from brass synchronizers to carbon, and while they do a great job of smoothing out the throw, it's almost a little bit too smooth, and sometimes I find myself missing that more metallic metal on metal feeling that you get from the brass synchros. Not a big issue at all. I would almost say that the AP2 box feels like kind of like an NC Miata, but with like a little bit of a shorter throw. Still a wonderful gearbox. Positive inputs right in there. So we're going to push a little bit here. It's cold out today, and one of the things I love about F-Series motors, or even any like really nicely tuned NA motors, is that when it's chilly out and it's dry, these engines just feel so much more sweeter. They're on the downside, they're a little bit more affected by hot, humid temps because they're just peakier and they're just more sensitive to those temperature changes. But like when you get a day like today, and the engine just feels like that much more crisp and like responsive, it's such a nice thing. So even though this car has all the revisions that the safeties, let's call them, that was put into the AP2 to kind of make it understeer a little bit and not be as violent at the limit. Right now with this setup, this car actually oversteers quite a bit and is more eager to rotate than even my AP1 with the setup that's on there. The tire stagger was shortened a little bit. It's now, instead of a 215 in the front, it's up to a 225, but retaining still a 245 in the rear. These are BF Goodrich Rival tires, front and back. So 225 front, 245 rear. The wheel size, though, is not staggered. It's a square set of 17 by 9 plus 40 millimeter offset, raised 57 extreme. So the stagger is overall greatly reduced over stock. So when this car approaches the limit, it's actually a little bit more eager to oversteer and come around. It doesn't have like that little safe bit of push that like kind of like my AP1 does, because the AP1, while it's still the same size, tire size front and rear, the wheels are staggered also. So it has a nudge of understeer like going into a corner, and it's just that safe amount of push where this doesn't. I actually kind of like that. I like more loose cars, and because neither version of the S2000 is very torquey, you need some momentum to really kind of get it rotating. Or using the brakes combined with the gas to get the weight transfer to the front and to get the car to come around. So I like that about this, but it has caught me off guard. At higher speed, it is a little bit more edgier. Not a huge deal, but it's just something that I want to make note of. So we're going to take a quick break here while I go through this section of traffic, and we'll resume when I have a nice clearing. So I talked a little bit before about how in the AP2 gears 1 through 4 were shortened, 5th remained the same, and 6th gear they actually extended. So that's one of the things I want to make note of, is that this car's a little bit nicer to cruise on the highway, because at any given RPM in 6th gear, your RPM's a little bit lower in speed versus the AP1. AP1 is literally, the gears are all stacked about pretty evenly across, so you don't really have to downshift in 6 if you're above 4,000 RPM. You put your foot down, it goes a little bit. You can still kind of get away with doing this in the AP2 because it's got the extra torque. I mean, either car, if you have to make an aggressive pass, you need to downshift a gear or two. But in terms of like taking longer trips, the AP2 is probably a little bit nicer just because you have that cruising RPM in 6th gear. So I've done a little upgrades to the interior of this car. I added a set of Recaro speeds. I think these are speeds or SR3s, but whatever that traditional Recaro reclinable style is, they sit a tiny pinch lower than stock. I always like the S2000's cabin. You do sit a little bit lower in it. The door panels come up a little bit higher. You kind of feel like you're in a little bit more of a cocoon. Even though the hood is longer, which is like one of the design cues that I really love about the car, it's at a downward slope, so outward visibility is actually quite well. The A-pillars are relatively thin. They're not terribly obtrusive for your vision. There's obviously blind spots coming out of the back a little bit, so this is a car where you always want to use your mirrors. But I use my mirrors anyways, just because I'm getting old and lazy. I don't like turning my head around all the way. So it's once you get used to the mirrors in the car, like it just becomes like second nature. You find yourself checking them, and you just kind of know where traffic is around you. Steering feel, S2000 uses probably one of the best electric steering racks I've ever felt. It's quite remarkable. There's plenty of feedback. Sure, it's a little bit more numb than like a first-gen Miata or a depowered rack car, but it's not This is a car I would leave. I wish, honestly, I wish every single one of my cars that I own had an S2000 power steering rack. Not necessarily for the ratio, but just for the system that provides this level of feedback with the ease of use of having a powered system. It's lovely. So let's see if we can get a clearing here and get the car to move around a little bit. So it's cold, and as you can see, tires are loose. A little bit of rubbing from the 17x9s. They don't quite fit in the rear, and we're hopping over these bumps. Short travel out of the teen suspension in this car. Heavy on the brakes. These are the stock brake pads, and they actually work quite well for a street car. Woohoo! But see, this is where the AP2 is more stable than the AP1 is. When you're cruising over bumps like that, it doesn't get nearly as upset as the AP1, so you could be a little bit more aggressive on the throttle, putting your foot down and opening it up quicker at corner exit. Both cars are freaking fantastic. I've always loved the S2000. It's wonderful, and it's a car it's kind of a selfish car because it's 2 seats, it's minimal cargo space. It really gives up a lot of creature comforts for just the pure driving experience, and for that's like really what this car is about. It's about the driving experience, and I've always loved the fact that Honda made this car up until 2008 or 9, whatever the last year was, and it was pretty much a bullshit-free car. There's no stupid iPads plastered in the dash or Bluetooth or complicated electronics. The car is very simple. In this generation, 2000 to 2005, the only nannies that you have, if you even want to call it a nanny, is ABS, and the ABS system is one of the best factory ABS systems ever. You can trail brake in these cars stupid deep and be stupid aggressive, and you don't get weird lockups or you don't get weird ABS behavior. This car, if you want to explore trail braking in, this is a fantastic car to do it, because this system is one of the best ABS systems in a sports car I've ever experienced. It's truly wonderful. What else? I don't know. It's a car that it just does everything for the pleasure experience, and the fact that it was made up until as late as it was, and it didn't follow suit in the direction that just about most of the way the rest of the car market went is truly awesome. And for that, I truly do love owning these cars. They're just lovely, wonderful, and they're a blast. They're an absolute blast. If you're a power hungry, it may not be the car for you, but if you're a little bit more mature minded and you're somebody who really loves the act of driving and going and finding windy, turny roads, this is the car. This is a great car. It's got enough comfort, decent enough sound system to just go and explore roads and find those turns, and it has that great balance because it's just comfortable enough where it's not miserable. I wouldn't take this for super long road trips if I had the choice. Just with the other cars that I have, I'd probably go to like my BMW or the RX-8. But I've done road trips. I've done 2 to 3 hour road trips in the S2000, and it was fine. It gets a little cramped after a while, but it's not anything that's unbearable. But the nice thing is it's a car that you could just cruise around in, be calm and comfortable. But when you find those corners, you could just turn on the attack mode and go for it. And that's why it's a wonderful car. And it just brings a smile to your face. Like it's that good. There's a reason why these cars are not going down in value. They are only appreciating, and I don't ever see them dropping any lower. They're just going to keep going back up. They're truly fantastic. Nothing has been made since Honda ceased production of this car that was quite like an S2000. Woo! It's such a wonderful car. It just goads you to the, like, come on, push, you know. And if you're a driver and you're into kind of like tail happy like rides, it's fantastic. That's like what it's all about. I was cruising calm, found the quick little corner, even though it wasn't that long before I started into residential and I got to cool it off. I was able to have fun. I was smiling on my face, and like I'm like, yeah, like I feel like a fucking hero. Getting the little power exit oversteer and correcting it, that's what rear-wheel drive is about, you know? That's the fun of it. And the fucking S2000, man, it's right there. It does it. So I don't really have much else to say about this for now. This is a great base to tune and go forward with. I don't know what the ultimate goal is, because I have the AP1. That's the car that I really want to focus on building. That's got a little bit more screamish of an engine. We'll do the road review for that very soon, and I'll this will be a great baseline to kind of show you the differences between this and we'll call my AP1 more of like that's like more the club sport version, right? It's like almost like the GT3 of the S2000, just comparing it to this. I'm not saying in real life, obviously it's not a GT3 competitor yet, but more RPM, semi-built motor, you know, more horsepower than this, and it's a lighter car, so it's a little bit more. It's like this, but kind of turned up another notch or two. So yeah. Honda S2000, fantastic car. Can't go wrong with it. If anybody ever has any questions or you want some advice buying one, definitely hit me up. I think they're totally awesome, and I just, if you're a car guy like me, and you're enthusiastic about cars like this, or you're curious about them, go drive one. You'll fall in love. If you can look past the power, it's fucking fantastic. So that's about all I have to say. Ooh, I didn't launch this car. Let me go up here where there's no houses, and I'll give you guys a quick launch. The AP2 is a little bit more difficult to launch, because going back to that clutch release or clutch delay valve like I was talking about, it does slip the clutch for you. And Honda, part of the reason why Honda did that is so you can't shock the rear differential. In the AP1s, people were doing 9,000 RPM clutch drops, and that really like shocks the rear. Go right here, and it really shocks the drivetrain. So that's the other reason why they did this. So you got to be a little bit more aggressive when you launch this car. Gotta love it, cold temperatures. And calm down before the oncoming car comes. So there you go. I think we covered our bases for this review. All right, guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and continue to watch this build thread unfold, or build project unfold on the channel, and we'll go from there. So, lovely evening. Good night.
Witness